Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're doing what if Benjamin Harrison won re-election in 1892. Sorry if you hear background noise, my mom is watching a TV show right now. So let's get started with it. This one's going to be a little bit shorter. I think I'm going to stick to this kind of format from now on. It just saves me a whole bunch of time that I don't have anymore. In 1892, of course, the only thing is here that James Weaver is not a candidate because Benjamin Harrison, in order to win, would have to take a more populist approach to winning. So he would have to make the Republican Party more populist, which will actually help Republicans down ballot a lot easier, and the Democrat Party would stay establishment, I guess you could say. But so Harrison would take a more populist approach, and so Republican President Benjamin Harrison would defeat Democrat President Grover Cleveland 235 to 208 to win re-election. We go over to 1896 and we get a more populist version of William McKinley. William McKinley was already very popular with farmers in the first place, so he would be even more popular if he took a more populist approach to it all. Democrats would actually take a more southern approach. We haven't had a southern president in a while, and the last time there was a southern Democrat president besides Andrew Johnson, he was very popular. Andrew Jackson, very popular. And they realized this, so they tried this approach again with Richard Bland, Missouri senator. McKinley's vice president would be Garrett Hobart, and Bland's vice president would be a northerner. They tried this southern-northern approach with Robert Pattinson. So in the end, Republican Governor William McKinley would defeat Democrat Congressman Richard Bland 272 to 175 to become the 24th President of the United States. In 1900, William McKinley and George Dewey would both be uncontested in their primary, but George Dewey, he's a very popular vice admiral. However, just because he's a Roman Catholic, he gets a lot of flack, which actually costs him the states of Utah and Idaho that Bland had won previously. And he chooses Adlai Stevenson I as his running mate, a northerner from Illinois. But Republican President William McKinley would defeat Democrat Vice Admiral George Dewey 282 to 165 to win re-election. In 1904, Vice President, or I guess now President Theodore Roosevelt, William McKinley would still be assassinated in this timeline. He would be uncontested in his primary, so President Roosevelt would still be a thing, and he would still be as popular as ever because he was already a populist to begin with. In the Democrat primary, Francis Cockrell will win. I think he's from Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken. A senator. My mistake. I thought he was a congressman. But of course, this is no challenge for Roosevelt. He beats him 307 to 169 to win re-election. So the same thing happens like it does in real life. Roosevelt appoints Taft as the primary winner. That's essentially what happened. Roosevelt wanted Taft to win, and Roosevelt supported Taft. But a lot of the populist Republicans didn't like Taft because he didn't stoke the populism that McKinley, Harrison, and Roosevelt instilled when they were president, and people were worried about that. Taft was more of a traditional liberal Republican, and of course Democrats would nominate Delaware Senator or Delaware Judge George Gray, who would go on to choose John Johnson, I think from Wisconsin, as his running mate, and Republican Secretary William Taft would defeat Democrat Judge George Gray 297 to 186 to become the 26th president. Popular vote-wise, George Gray would actually almost win the popular vote, only being separated by 3,000 votes or more. So Taft would do very poorly in the popular vote. In the Republican primary, William Taft would be primaried by Teddy Roosevelt, and this time would be different. Roosevelt would actually kick Taft out. He would actually kick him out of the primary and actually win, unseating a president. This would be the first time, and actually the only time this timeline where that happens. However, there will be another chance here in about 100 years from now where it actually happens again. But but it's clear, populism makes incumbency irrelevant. And so, in the Democrat primary, we had the Missouri Speaker from the House, Champ Clark, win the nomination. Roosevelt would choose Hiram Johnson as his running mate. And Champ Clark would go with a New Jersey Southerner. He's a New Jersey native Southern person, Woodrow Wilson, hoping to win more of the New England area. That's his strategy, but he doesn't work so well. But he does win Indiana, which is very, very helpful going forward. So, but in the end, Republican President Theodore Roosevelt defeats Democrat Speaker Champ Clark 314 to 217 to win re-election as the 27th president. In 1960, Roosevelt decides not to run for a third full term, or a fourth term, depending on how you look at it. But in the Republican primary, Charles Hughes, the Associate Justice from the Supreme Court, wins the nomination, and a former running mate to Champ Clark, Woodrow Wilson, Democrats take a risk not nominating a Southerner, or a native Southerner. And, well, kind of pays out if you look at it compared to how they've been doing, as Roosevelt wins a lot of northern states: Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Montana, and even New Jersey. He does very well. He almost even wins California and Illinois in the process, which makes Democrats hopeful in the future. For Republican Justice Charles Hughes would defeat Democrat Governor Woodrow Wilson 298 to 233 to become the 28th president. Uh, Democrats would have a tough time trying to figure out who to nominate, but they nominate former ambassador to the Cleveland administration, John Davis, former UN ambassador. John Davis would become the um, excuse me, UK ambassador. He would become the Democrat nominee, and he would choose Ohio, I think Governor James Cox as his running mate, hoping to win more of the Rust Belt, as they see it's just becoming less and less Republican. But Republican President Charles Hughes would defeat Democrat Ambassador John Davis 339 to 192 to win re-election. However, in 1924, John Davis would return again for the nomination, and it would be successful. But former Vice President Hiram Johnson would win the Republican primary. Now, I want you to imagine Donald Trump. That's how Hiram Johnson would run his campaign and presidency, and there would be no Robert La Follette to be a third party, even though it really didn't do anything, except screw John Davis over in the end. He would actually be Johnson's running mate, and La Follette would actually be more on board with this populist regime that the Republican Party is going with, instead of making his own progressive party. So that would actually help Republicans a lot. And Republican Vice President Hiram Johnson would defeat Democrat Ambassador John Davis 342 to 189 to become the 29th president. A very popular Tennessee Congressman, Cordell Hull, he would win the Democrat nomination, and he would choose New York Governor Al Smith as his running mate, hoping to win New York, as we've seen some trends to the Democrat side of things from New York, very small trends, but he's hoping to win New York. But Hiram Johnson proves to be a very popular president. He cuts taxes by a lot. His own presidency actually pushes back the Great Depression by a little bit, which is actually good for the country if you look at it. The Great Depression actually hits a little later than it does in our timeline with Johnson as president. For Republican President Hiram Johnson defeats Democrat Congressman Cordell Hull 382 to 149 to win re-election. In 1932, John Nance Garner would end up winning the Democrat nomination, the Texas Speaker of the House, and he would go up against John J. Blaine from Wisconsin. But however, John J. Blaine would run a terrible campaign against John Garner. John Garner, very popular in the South and actually nationwide. One of the few Democrats who have nationwide name recognition, I guess you could say, as he would choose a very popular governor, Franklin Roosevelt, to be his running mate. Roosevelt would have no presidential inspirations due to his brother being a lot more popular this time around than he was last time, or his fifth cousin, excuse me. So Democrat Speaker John Garner would defeat Republican Senator John Blaine 290-241 to become the 30th President of the United States. Blaine doesn't even win his home state of Wisconsin. That's how bad he runs a campaign. In 1936, the Great Depression hits in 1934, a little bit after the midterms, which saves the Democrats from losing triple-digit seats in the House. But John Garner keeps his popularity. He actually does the exact opposite of what Herbert Hoover does, and pass a bunch of legislation that helps in low and no-income families, I guess you can say, which makes him even more popular. The Great Depression is a little less bearing on the country than it was in real life. And Republicans nominate a very popular publisher, Frank Knox, who is actually very popular amongst Republicans, but John Garner is just all that much more popular as he wins in a landslide. Democrat President John Garner defeats Republican publisher Frank Knox 449 to 82 to win re-election. In 1940, Thomas Dewey and William Bankhead win their respected nominations. Dewey seeing some challengers from New York Governor Wendell Willkie, Secretary of Commerce under the Johnson administration, Herbert Hoover, and Ohio Senator Robert Taft. Bankhead, of course, dealing with Cordell Hull, very popular still, but a lot of people say we don't want Cordell Hull to be the nominee again, so we're going to go with William Bankhead. And, of course, Miller Tidings, who doesn't have that much name recognition. So William Bankhead, I think he's a Speaker of the House, excuse me. But, of course, Dewey would choose the Ohio Senator Robert Taft. Dewey would know that the Rust Belt is starting to go more Democrat. And Bankhead would choose a New Yorker as his running mate, James Farley, who I think is a congressman from New York. I could be wrong. But Republican attorney Thomas Dewey would defeat Democrat Speaker William Bankhead in a landslide, 359 to 172, to become the 31st president. Dewey would be seen as more popular now, as he's not running against someone with a good name recognition like Harry Truman, and he'd actually win in this election. And he'd end up being a very popular president in the meanwhile. Think of the Trump and Reagan administration. The Reagan's, nice guy act with the Trump's policy ideals. That's kind of what happens with Dewey right now. But of course, Harry Byrd, very popular senator from Virginia, also a racist. But he would choose James Farley again for the nomination, as New York was actually the closest state in the 1940 election, but it doesn't get as close this time, as Thomas Dewey wins it by roughly 6 to 5 points. Republican President Thomas Dewey would defeat Democrat Senator Harry Byrd 333 to 198 to win re-election. Sadly, Dewey doesn't do as well this time because Harry Byrd would be a lot more known than Bankhead was. More people like Byrd than what they did Bankhead. Byrd has a consistent message, but it isn't enough as Dewey beats him. In 1948, Vice President Robert Taft would win the Republican nomination, and Democrats would go with Harry Truman, who would be seen as the traditional guy, the safe bet. But a certain South Carolina governor named Strom Thurmond says, no, that's not the way to go. Republicans have been doing this way better than us Democrats have. We need to go into a way of populism. And so this gives the birth of Strom Thurmond's Southern populism idea in this timeline. Of course, with Strom Thurmond running, it does screw out Truman out of winning the presidency, as Republican Vice President Robert Taft defeats Democrat Senator Harry Truman and Dixiecrat Governor Strom Thurmond 316 to 140 to 75 to become the 32nd president. As you can see on the map, Strom Thurmond does a lot better this time around than he does last time. He even wins the state of Florida, which would have gone to Harry Truman if I had to tell you something. If I had to give you some behind-the-scenes stuff, but Strom Thurmond does very well in the deep South. He does well in the battlegrounds of Utah and Nevada and Colorado and Kansas. Does very well. In the 1952 election, Robert Taft is easily renominated. But on the Democrat side, they're like, okay, let's take Strom Thurmond's idea. He clearly knew what was going on. It helped us very well in the 1950 midterms. So they nominate Alben Barkley, who was very popular with both traditionalists and the Southern populists. And he chooses Hubert Humphrey, Minnesota senator, as his running mate. But Republican President Robert Taft would be so popular, unlike his father, William Taft. Robert Taft would defeat Democrat Senator Alben Barkley in a landslide, 370 to 161 to win re-election. So they try again with someone who was not a traditionalist by any means, more of the Southern populist, Estes Kefauver, as he would run against Vice President Dwight D. Eisenhower, as Eisenhower saw minimal opposition from John Bricker, Joe Foss, and William Knowland, but still opposition nonetheless. Eisenhower would choose Nixon as his running mate, and Kefauver would choose Adlai Stevenson II as his running mate. But in the end, Republican Vice President Dwight D. Eisenhower would defeat Democrat Congressman Estes Kefauver 342 to 188 to become the 33rd President of the United States. As you can see, Eisenhower would do very well in the western part of the state. He even win his home state of Texas, which would be the shock of the election. However, in 1960, Dwight D. Eisenhower's health would be a very big issue, and Stuart Semington would be the populist candidate in the Democrat primary, and Lyndon B. Johnson, who says, you are turning this party into a radical faction, I guess you could say. But of course, Johnson doesn't win. Stuart Semington does, who is a senator from Missouri, a bunch of Missouri Democrats coming into this video, and he chooses a very popular senator, Massachusetts Senator John Kennedy, as his running mate. But they end up tying in the Electoral College, actually, 268 to 268. However, the House would choose Stuart Semington as the 34th president. However, Stuart Semington would lose the popular vote by 5 million votes to Dwight D. Eisenhower, actually. But, of course, he would hold no grudge and say he won fair and square. However, Stuart Semington would be proven to be a very popular president. He would actually pass a bunch of Kennedy's ideas that Johnson passed. He would actually pass a more moderate Voting Rights Act, a more moderate Civil Rights Act. He would actually ban the poll tax in his time as president, and he would actually make a bunch of Southerners very angry, a bunch of Deep South Southerners. But nobody primaries him because he's just so daggone popular, which is why he ends up winning in a landslide, despite facing off against someone popular as Nelson Rockefeller, who chooses James Rhodes a senator from Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken. Democrat President Stuart Symington defeats Republican Governor Nelson. Oh, yeah, never mind. Nelson Rockefeller, 480 to 58 to win re-election. A big landslide for Stuart Symington, despite losing the popular vote 4 years earlier. Also, JFK is not assassinated in this timeline. In 1968, in the Republican primary, Ronald Reagan would bring on a new message: conservatism. Clearly, with Stuart Symington, this populism isn't working in the Republican primary anymore. Let's go on to straight conservatism. And Reagan would win the nomination based off his message. Going offward with the Southern populism, they nominate the first black man to be nominated by a major party, Reverend Channing Phillips. This does anger a bunch of traditionalists in the South when it comes to the issue of race, so they they nominate George Wallace as the American Independent. And Reagan, Phillips, and Wallace would all be tied and inconclusive. Nobody would get 270 electoral votes, but Reagan would be elected as the 35th U.S. president by the House due to vote splitting in the House by Phillips and Wallace in states like the Deep South. In 1972, Reagan, of course, popular as ever, passes a bunch of his legislation 8 years earlier than he does in real life, becomes very popular very quickly. And Democrats would nominate North Carolina Governor Terry Sanford. I'm very happy I got a North Carolinian in this video. And Reagan's running mate, George Romney, would stick with him. And Terry Sanford would actually make a mistake. He would nominate George McGovern, a South Dakota senator, as his running mate, who many consider too far left for what they're planning. But, of course, Terry Sanford actually implies a new strategy, the Rust Belt strategy, where he aims to pick off safe Democrat states as well as the Rust Belt states of Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania into his column. Excuse me. In 1976, Democrats would nominate a very popular populist governor, Jimmy Carter, and Republicans would nominate Vice President George Romney, who is very conservative, many people would look at. But a lot of people would say he's not conservative enough. Carter would still choose Walter Mondale as his running mate. Romney would choose Gerald Ford, the Michigan minority leader in the House. But Romney would pull off a terrible campaign. We always get those every once in a while. As Democrat Governor, Jimmy Carter would defeat Republican Vice President George Romney in a landslide, 362 to 175, to become the 36th President of the United States. And of course, Jimmy Carter's first term plays out the same as it did in real life, as Republicans would nominate conservative senator from Tennessee, Howard Baker, as the running mate. Of course, there was George H.W. Bush, who was now the Texas senator, or a senator from Texas, with Lloyd Bentsen, of course. But people looked at him as not conservative enough. But Baker would nominate John Anderson, a Republican and a traditionalist, which does piss off a lot of people. But people don't like Jimmy Carter, so... Well, right now they don't, because of oil crisis, energy crisis, the Iran hostage crisis, all that. And Republican Senator Howard Baker would defeat Democrat President Jimmy Carter 278 to 260 to become the 37th U.S. President. Democrats would nominate Ruben Askew, the governor of Florida, who many people are hoping can pick off Florida again for the, not the third election in a row, my mistake. But Ruben Askew would only have minor challenges from Ernest Holling, who I think is the Arkansas governor. I could be wrong, though. And he chooses Alan Cranston as his running mate, who is the Indiana senator or congressman, one of the two. But Howard Baker would defeat Democrat Governor Ruben Askew 346 to 192 to win re-election. Howard Baker would be seen more as a transitional president, but a very popular one at that. Excuse me. In 1988, Republicans would nominate a Georgia congressman. Yes, someone from Georgia, the South. They start doing something different. Jack Kemp, he actually gets the nomination saying, Republicans are going to do great with conservatism in the South, like Democrats did for so many years. He says this message. Is he right? We'll have to find out. And Democrats go with Tennessee Senator Al Gore. Al Gore runs a pretty good campaign. It's very back and forth. It's a pretty close election. But Jack Kemp would choose George H.W. Bush, Texas Senator, to be his running mate. And Al Gore would choose Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis as his running mate. It's a pretty back and forth election. You'll see Jack Kemp up in some polls, Al Gore up some polls. But at the end of the day, Republican Congressman Brian Kemp would defeat Jack Kemp, not Brian Kemp, excuse me, to defeat Democrat Senator Al Gore 316 to 221 to become the 38th president. But shortly after Kemp's first term, there's a recession, and a pretty bad one at that, which causes our country, to go, well, not bankrupt, but we're in a pretty bad state. Pretty worse than what 2008 was. And NAFTA is very unpopular because, hey, we need to keep our jobs. And Ross Perot would run as a Democrat because Southern populism would be actually more attractive to Ross Perot in this timeline, as most of his policies would be Democrat policies in this case. He would run in this case, and he would choose Democrat Governor Jerry Brown as his running mate. And he would defeat Jack Kemp 420 to 118 to become the 39th president. He becomes a very popular president indeed. And Democrats would nominate Pat Buchanan, who says that we need him, who actually brings the idea of conservatism and populism, a mixture of the two, but his idea is quickly shot down after he loses to Ross Perot 348 to 190. In the 2000 election, hold on, I need to take something to drink, my throat is dry. Excuse me. Al Gore is back, and he's back better than ever. He's in his prime now, as you can see. And he's running against George Bush, and there's really no change here. Bush barely wins, and he loses the popular vote too. So there's really no change to the 2000 election. However, George W. Bush's popularity is the same, except Democrats would nominate a better candidate, a southern senator from North Carolina, John Edwards, who once again implies a Rust Belt strategy, but this time includes Missouri in this. However, he gets every state except Indiana, which, snooze you lose, I guess. And he chooses John Kerry, a Massachusetts senator, as his running mate. So Democrat Senator John Edwards defeats Republican President George Bush 318 to 219 to become the 41st president. However, a scandal comes out about John Edwards shortly after he announces his bid to run for re-election that he's cheating on his dying wife. And so former Vermont Governor Howard Dean would primary him. He doesn't get successful, though, as Edwards would still win. And people would talk about how John Edwards could be ousted from the position. However, he's not. And Republicans would nominate Mitt Romney, who would, just like George Bush, would be seen as more conservative than their father, who was also the former vice president. And Romney would choose Ron Paul, the Kentucky congressman, a Southerner, to be his running mate. And Republican governor, yes, he's governor, Mitt Romney would defeat Democrat President John Edwards 280 to 258 to become the 42nd president. However, again, we are in a recession at this point, and Mitt Romney says he would get rid of the recession by the eve before the midterms. That doesn't happen, and he becomes very unpopular. We're still in the recession by the 2012 election, which many people are unemployed and all that. And Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump have a new vision for the Democrat Party. Barack Obama says it's moderate, being the moderate party. Bernie Sanders says it's the far left party, and Donald Trump says it's being the left-wing populism. All of them good ideas. But of course, Mitt Romney's not primaried. Obama wins it by the skin of his teeth. The primary is actually contested by the three. However, Bernie Sanders would drop out before the convention, and Obama would be chosen by the delegates, which would piss off Donald Trump, and he doesn't endorse Barack Obama. Obama would still choose Delaware Senator Joe Biden as his running mate, and he would end up defeating Mitt Romney 296 to 242 to become the 43rd president. In the 2016 elections, we have a very contested Republican primary and even a contested Democrat primary too, as Obama would be primaried by Donald Trump, who said he unjustly lost in 2012. However, he did said if Obama wins by the people, he will go by that, and it will be Obama's party, and he won't try to challenge him again. And of course, that happens. Obama actually wins 2 months before the convention by primaries and caucuses, and Trump endorses him as soon as he drops out, saying it's his party, he won fair and square. And of course, Ted Cruz would be seen as the most plausible choice to beat Barack Obama, and of course he doesn't, despite him choosing a woman for the first time, the first person to do that. Democrat President Barack Obama would defeat Republican Senator Ted Cruz 286 to 251 to win re-election. In 2020, we have a very contested Democrat primary, and the Republican Party not so much. We would have a very popular Illinois Congressman, Joe Walsh, who would still be congressman. Well, he would still be congressman up until the 2020 election. He'd be very popular. He'd be even considered a possible Senate candidate if he didn't run for president. And he says he plans to run for Senate if he loses, which we would have to see. Well, in this timeline, but not in this one, because, he's a loser in this timeline. And he would shoot in, his campaign would be seen as a bad campaign, poor campaigning when he chooses a very controversial figure, former Governor Mark Sanford, and even former representative who had a controversy about him cheating on his wife. Man, a lot of people cheating on their wives in politics. That's just not right. Don't cheat on your wife. Your wife is important. But Joe Biden would be seen as very popular. Hey, who's Obama's running mate? Got us out of a recession. Even though Joe Biden can't talk worth crap, he still ends up winning the nomination, and he beats Joe Walsh. Democrat Vice President Joe Biden defeats Republican Congressman Joe Walsh 322 to 2. I can't speak either. Damn, look at me talking shit. 322 to 216 to become the 44th president, and Joe Biden would be president-elect still. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the Chaotic One saying peace.